The sun was dipping behind the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. His horse, usually calm and obedient, suddenly stopped in its tracks, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. It pawed at the ground and let out an uneasy whinny, causing him to look in the direction the animal was staring. At first, all he saw were rocks and scrub brush, nothing out of the ordinary. But then he noticed a faint movement, barely perceptible against the red dirt. Something, or someone, was struggling in the shadows. He dismounted quickly, heart pounding, and moved closer, the wind carrying a faint sound of a groan. As he approached, the figure came into view, a woman, clearly wounded, lying face down among the sagebrush. Her clothes were torn, streaked with blood and dirt, and her dark hair clung to her pale, sweat-streaked face. His pulse quickened. She was an Apache woman, he realized with a mixture of fear and awe. He had heard stories of the Apache, of their courage, their skill, and their fierce loyalty to their land and people. Yet here she was, injured and vulnerable, and he knew instinctively that her life depended on his next actions. The horse whinnied again, nudging him as if urging him to help, and he felt an odd connection to the animal, a silent communication that they were partners in this moment. Kneeling beside her, he saw the wound, a deep cut along her side, possibly from a knife or arrow. Blood had soaked through her clothing, and she groaned in pain as she shifted slightly. His mind raced, debating whether to carry her back to town, try to treat her on the spot, or somehow move her to the nearest shelter. Every second counted. Carefully, he assessed her injuries, noting that the bleeding was slowing but the wound was deep enough to be life-threatening. She stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open to reveal a mixture of fear, pain, and determination. He spoke softly, "I'm going to help you. You're safe now." Her gaze met his, sharp and wary, yet something in her expression hinted at trust, or at least curiosity. Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice trembling, hoarse from pain. He shook his head, unsure how to answer. Some questions, he realized, could wait until she was alive and breathing steadily again. He quickly fashioned a makeshift bandage from his shirt and a strip of cloth, pressing it against the wound to slow the bleeding further. Every movement had to be deliberate, careful, because any sudden motion could worsen her condition. The horse circled nervously, as if guarding them both, stamping and whinnying, adding a surreal intensity to the moment. The Apache woman flinched at first, then allowed him to continue, her eyes never leaving his, filled with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Once the bleeding was partially under control, he lifted her carefully into his arms, surprised by her lightness despite the muscular strength she must possess. Carrying her to his horse, he helped her onto the saddle, balancing her gently across the back. The horse seemed to understand, standing perfectly still, ears twitching as though sensing the urgency. "Hold on," he whispered. "I'll get you somewhere safe." Her grip tightened slightly around his arm, and he felt the tremor of pain running through her body, a stark reminder that every second mattered. As he rode toward the nearest settlement, the landscape stretched out in endless waves of red rock and sparse vegetation. The wind whipped past, carrying the scent of dust and sage, mixing with the faint metallic tang of her blood. He tried to focus, keeping the horse steady, but his mind was a storm of questions. Who had attacked her? Why was she alone here? And perhaps most importantly, how would she react once she realized she had no choice but to trust him? The Apache woman remained silent for most of the ride, eyes closed, lips pressed tight. He respected her silence, knowing that trauma often demanded quiet. Occasionally, she would mutter in her native tongue, words he didn't understand, but the tone was not of accusation, it was of pain, frustration, and exhaustion. He realized that even without words, a story was unfolding, one of survival, courage, and desperation, and that he had become an unwilling participant in it. By the time they reached the small outpost, twilight had fully descended, turning the world into a tapestry of deep blues and purples. He secured the horse quickly and carried the woman inside, laying her gently on a cot. Villagers and a few local doctors rushed to assist, amazed at her condition but grateful that she had arrived alive. She groaned softly as they worked, the pain still evident, but the danger of immediate death had passed. His heart, though exhausted, swelled slightly. He had saved her, at least for now. As she was tended to, she opened her eyes once more, looking at him with a mixture of suspicion, gratitude, and curiosity. "Why?" she whispered again. "Why did you help me?" He knelt beside her, tired but resolute. "Because no one deserves to die alone," he said simply. The weight of the words seemed to settle over them both, bridging the vast chasm between their worlds. Little did he know, this act of compassion would set off a chain of events neither of them could have imagined, changing the course of both their lives forever. The night was quiet outside the small outpost, but inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The Apache woman lay on the cot, wrapped in blankets, her eyes occasionally fluttering open to study her surroundings. The pain still radiated from her wound, but it was manageable now, and the relief in her eyes was tempered by vigilance. She had survived so far, but trust did not come easily to her. She watched him as he moved around the room, checking on supplies, making sure nothing was forgotten. His presence was calm, steady, yet commanding in its own understated way, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought her here. He finally sat down beside her, keeping his voice low, gentle. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here," he said. She stared at him, her eyes sharp, as though reading for lies, for hidden motives. Then, slowly, she nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her features. I don't know your ways," she whispered. "The land, your people, I don't understand. And yet, you saved me." Her voice wavered, carrying both gratitude and a tinge of fear. He placed a reassuring hand on hers, careful not to touch the wound, and said, "You don't need to understand everything right now. Just survive tonight." As the hours passed, the silence between them grew less tense and more intimate. He listened as she muttered stories in her native tongue, snippets of her past, tales of the lands she roamed, battles fought, and loved ones lost. He didn't understand the words, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. Each story revealed a fragment of her courage, her fierce independence, and the life she had led before fate had thrown her into danger. He realized that this encounter was not just about saving a life, it was about entering a world he had never known, a life lived with intensity and raw authenticity. Eventually, hunger and fatigue drew them into a fragile routine. He brought her food and water, helping her eat without straining her wound. She accepted it cautiously, her pride warring with necessity. "I don't ask for much," she said softly, "and I will not be a burden. But I owe you my life, cowboy. And for that, I am yours, in a way that no one else could claim." The weight of her words pressed on him, complicated and heavy. He understood that her offer was not one of mere gratitude, it was trust, surrender, and a challenge all at once. Outside, the wind howled through the outpost, carrying the scent of the desert and distant fires. He kept one eye on the horizon, knowing that danger might still lurk in the shadows, and one on her, knowing that the true challenge would not be in fighting attackers but in navigating the fragile, intense bond forming between them. She shifted slightly, wincing at pain, and he adjusted the blankets carefully. "You will heal," he said firmly. "And then, you will decide what comes next. No rush." She met his gaze, silent acknowledgement passing between them, a pact of understanding forged in the quiet night. As midnight approached, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken tension. She moved closer, drawn not only by necessity but by instinct, the human need for warmth and protection. He remained still, letting her find comfort without forcing it, aware that every gesture, every motion, carried significance. Her breath came in shallow, measured rhythms, and he realized that survival was no longer just physical, it was emotional, a delicate balance of trust and vulnerability. At some point, their hands brushed, fleeting and almost accidental, yet the impact was electric. Her eyes widened slightly, and he felt the charge of life between them, the thrill of proximity, the unspoken acknowledgement of what had begun to grow. It was not lust alone, nor mere gratitude, it was a connection forged in crisis, a bond created by shared vulnerability and the knowledge that they had saved each other, in different ways. She finally spoke, her voice low and earnest. "You saved me, but I am not powerless. You must know that." He nodded, recognizing the fire in her eyes, the resilience beneath the pain. "I know," he replied quietly. "And I respect it. You are stronger than I imagined." The honesty in his tone seemed to satisfy her, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile softened her features. It was fleeting, fragile, but it carried hope. Hours turned into the quiet early morning, the first light of dawn beginning to seep into the room. She rested against him slightly, no longer tense, her breathing slower and more even. He felt the weight of the night settle around them, the exhaustion, the adrenaline, the relief, and the connection that had grown in the shadows of danger. It was a fragile peace, yet a powerful one, the kind that could change the course of lives if nurtured and respected. Before the sun fully rose, she whispered again, almost reverently, You you have changed everything for me tonight. I do not forget such acts, and I do not forget those who act with courage and kindness. Remember this, and I will remember you." He nodded, understanding the depth of her words, the promise woven between gratitude and destiny. This night had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it was ending with trust, connection, and a bond that neither could ignore.